All right, so thank you everybody for coming to Choosing Seeds for Spring Planting. My name is Spencer, and just really quick before we get started, I do have the land acknowledgement to read for Jackson County Library Services. So, Jackson County Library Services acknowledges that its libraries are located within the traditional lands of the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians and the Modoc Nation, as well as the Shasta, Takelma, and Lotgawa people, whose descendants are now identified as members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. We take this moment to recognize the Indigenous people whose traditional lands are where residents of Jackson County live today. JCLS is committed to fostering understanding, deep respect, and honor for Indigenous people, and we encourage you to learn more about the land you reside on. For more information, go to jcls.org/land. All right, thank you. The last quick thing I have is that the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. We have to say that for every presentation. So with that, we are ready to turn it over to Ronnie. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and turn off my video. If you have any questions, like I said, just put them in the chat.
Thank you for that introduction, Spencer. And thank you to all of you who are here today. I don't know what the weather is like just where you are, but where I am, it has been raining and even snowing today, which is illustrative of January in the Pacific Northwest in Northern California. And this is the time of year when we are absolutely itching to get out into the garden, but usually cannot do it because it's too cold and too wet. So we do the next best thing, which is to plan our gardens for the coming season. And to help do that, there's nothing better than browsing through seed catalogs and seeing what's new and what we might want to add to our gardens. They're just fun to look at. This little presentation might just as well be called How to Read a Seed Catalog, because in my years of teaching vegetable growing, I have found that the seed catalogs can be a little bit mysterious and hard to understand. So I'm going to be showing you some of the little tips and tricks for understanding what's in them. But first, let us start with the basics. Why would you want to even bother growing plants from seed? Why not just buy already started plants? You can find them in lots of garden stores, grocery stores, all sorts of places. It's pretty easy to find plants that you can transplant, particularly tomatoes, which is kind of everybody's favorite summer vegetable. But there are some good reasons why you can't always do that. One is that there are some plants that you have to start from seed if you want to grow them. They just do not transplant easily. Things like carrots and turnips. You're going to damage the roots if you try and transplant those, and they just won't grow. It's also a lot more economical if you want a whole lot of one kind of plant. For example, peas, you probably want more than you're going to want to transplant from a six-pack. Same with lettuce. If you want a lot of marigolds for your landscape purposes, you might want to grow them yourself instead of buying a six-pack. You might want varieties that aren't available as transplants, because oftentimes there's a limited selection of what you can transplant. And it's also just plain fun to do. My absolutely favorite thing about gardening is sowing seeds and then waiting to see if they will, waiting for that little bit of the stem to emerge from the soil and that's always just a thrill. So let's talk about what a seed is. It's a tiny embryonic plant inside a food source. That food source is called a cotyledon, and that's inside of a protective coating. Seeds are produced by all flowering plants. And here is a diagram of what a seed looks like. This is probably a lima bean seed, but even very tiny seeds like carrot seed or tomato seeds, they all have the same basic structure. The embryo consists of three parts. There's a radicle, which develops into a root. I find that an easy word to remember, radicle. It kind of has an association with root. And then the plumule, which I think of as a plume or a feather, that develops into the leaf. And then there is the hypocotyl. That's the what is in between the root and the leaf. Here I've got my laser pointer on. It'll be a little easier for you to see. So that develops into the stem in between what becomes the root and the leaf. And then that's surrounded by this hypocotyl. That is, if you're thinking of a lima bean, that's what we eat. That's the part of the bean that we eat. It gives us food, and it also gives the growing plant food when it's just getting started. That whole thing is surrounded by a coating called a testa. No reason to remember that word. There is a little spot here where that seed is attached to whatever it is that holds it, the kind of capsule. Think of a pea inside of a pod. That's what attaches the pea to the pod. You can think of it kind of like a belly button. And then there is a tiny hole. That's called a micropyle, and the purpose of that is to let water inside the seed after you sow it in order to get that process of growing moving ahead. Something that you might like to do just for fun is to soak a lima bean until it's ready to split. Look at the embryo inside, just take it apart, look at the embryo inside. It'll be on one side of the bean or the other side. And you should be able to see, if it's a big enough lima bean, that tiny plants growing in there. You might need a magnifying glass in order to do it. The embryo does not start to grow until it has the right conditions, and those differ from one kind of seed to another. They all need moisture, but some need a lot of warmth, and some actually will germinate better in cooler temperatures. Some need light to germinate, and some need total darkness. So you kind of need to know what the conditions are for each seed, and they are what you provide when you sow the seed. You want to pay particular attention to the soil temperature, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I suggest you buy and use a soil thermometer if you don't have one already. It will be very helpful in deciding when to sow your seeds. You can find them at any garden store, and some hardware stores will have them. They're different kinds. Some of them look like a candy thermometer, for example, or a meat thermometer. So where do you want to get your seeds? You can find them off the rack at garden centers, grocery stores, hardware stores, all sorts of places in the springtime, usually only in the spring. There's a limited selection, but hey, why not do it, particularly because you can get them quickly. Find probably some that you can use. You don't have to pay for any shipping costs, and it's a great thing to do. Or if you want a bigger selection, You can buy them by mail order from specialist seed companies using their printed catalogs or their online catalogs. And I'll show you more about what those look like. Lots of different seed companies, lots of different seed catalogs. These are just a few. These first few are ones that I've seen very commonly on racks in the Rogue Valley. I've bought quite a few of Ed Hume seeds off the rack because they just have some varieties that I like. These I think are mostly mail order, these few. Siskiyou Seeds is a local company, and I have seen those at the food co-ops. Johnny's is a big mail order company, kind of like this last one we'll talk about. This is what their outside of their catalog looks like. Botanical Interests is also often on the seed racks here, and Territorial Seed Company you can find sometimes as well. They all have different characteristics and different specialties. Some of them sell only organic or biodynamic or non-GMO or open pollinated, that means non-hybrid seeds. Some sell seeds that are grown in a particular region. Siskiyou Seeds, for example, sell seeds that are raised on the West Coast for the most part, not necessarily in the Rogue Valley. And some of them specialize in vegetables, some in flowers. Territorial Seed Company is located in Cottage Grove, and they specialize in varieties of vegetables and flowers that do well here in the Pacific Northwest. They test everything on their gardens. They don't produce all of their seed, but they do produce a lot of them. But they do trial them all in their trial gardens. I have found their catalog to be the most complete and easy to understand information about how to grow different kinds of vegetables. Johnny's is also good, so go ahead and get their catalog too. But I think you'll find Territorial is excellent, and whether or not you want to buy their seeds, right after this program, go to their website and order a copy of their printed catalog. You may want to keep it wherever you garden and to refer to as you garden. That's how good the information is in it. And in a few minutes, we'll be looking at some of the pages inside their catalog. But first, what you need to do first is decide what kinds of seeds you want to get. So think about your particular gardening conditions. Know how cold your winters are, how hot your summers are, and in particular, the length of your growing season. That is, how many days there are between the last frost in the springtime and the first frost in the fall. Very important information to have when you're thinking of what particular kinds of summertime vegetables or flowers it is that you want to get. Where is your garden located? Is it in the sun or is it in the shade? Is it level? Is it sloped? Is it windy there? And where is your garden? What size is it? Are you gardening in the ground? Are you gardening in raised beds? Are you gardening in pots on your patio or your deck? You can have a very nice garden just in pots, but understand what those conditions are. Also, what kind of soil do you have? Is it sandy or is it clay? And then think about your needs and wants. If you're going to grow vegetables, do you want them just for fresh eating? In that case, you probably want to emphasize varieties that are going to taste good and that you can harvest over a long period. But if you want to can or freeze your vegetables, then you may want varieties that will be ready to harvest at one time. So what's most important to you? Flavor, long storage, a uniform size. And if you are growing flowers, do you want them for cutting mostly or for landscape? Do you care about the colors? You probably do. How tall are they? The time and length of the flowering season. Do you care whether they will attract pollinators like bees and butterflies? Do you want only native plants, native flowers growing in your garden? And do you care whether your seeds are grown organically or biodynamically or raised in a particular region, close to home maybe? Do you want to save seeds from what you grow in order to sow those seeds next year instead of buying new seeds from seed companies? If you do, you must be sure and buy open pollinated seeds. And we'll talk more about that as well. So you've decided what kinds of seeds you want to grow. If you're buying them off a rack, what information will you find to help you decide whether to buy it and help you learn how to grow it? So here are the front of several different packets of cucumbers offered by different companies. In every case, as you'll see, the name of the company is on the front, and it says cucumber, and there is an illustration, very tempting illustration of what that vegetable will look like at the time when it's ready to be harvested. It will also tell you how many days from the time, in this case, from the time that you plant the seed until you could pick the first cucumber. I think that's 52 days in this case. I think that's 55. It's a little bit hard to read, but it will tell you how many days to harvest. It will, of course, tell you how much that packet costs and maybe how many seeds are in the packet. You'll notice that territorial here, and this is botanical interests. They have a pretty good description on the front of the packet. And botanical interests tells you that it is an heirloom. And botanical interests also gives you the name of the species. And let me say a little bit about what a species is. The species name in this case is Cucumis sativus. Now that first name, Cucumis, is the genus. It is the name for a group of plants that have quite a lot in similar. So cucumbers are a member of the Cucumis genus, but certain melons like cantaloupe and honeydew are also part of that genus. So to distinguish further, they get a second name, which is called a specific epithet. It is just something that describes that particular kind of plant. Usually, or often at least, that name is in Latin. And in this case, I don't know what sativus means, but it means something having to do with cucumbers as opposed to melons. Now, on the back of these packets, there may be another description of the variety, and there will be some very good information on how deep to plant those seeds, how far apart to plant them, again, how many days until you can harvest them, how many days before you can expect to see, it's really days, not so much to germination, but really how many days until that little plant will emerge from the soil. Actually, the seeds germinate before you can see the results because they send out their root before they send out their leaves and stems. And something also quite important is when these seeds were packed and by when they should be sold. So you can tell if those are going to be fresh seeds or if they're really a little bit too late to buy. In this case, in the case of Ferry Morse, there's just kind of a general information about when those seeds should be planted. So if you go up here to Oregon, it says late May to June, that doesn't tell you as much as you might like to know. This is territorial, and territorial is more specific because it says direct sow when soil temperatures reach at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit. In the case of cucumbers, it's very important that the soil temperature is that high. That's why it's so good to have a soil thermometer. Doesn't matter what the air temperature is, it's the soil temperature that really matters. And territorial also suggests that you can start those cucumber seeds indoors and then transplant them, gaining maybe a couple of weeks of growth, moving things along a little bit faster. Territorial also includes on its packets quite a few growing tips, how to fertilize and how to mulch and things like that. It tells you somewhere down here the minimum germination standard, and territorial prides itself in providing this information. They're telling you that 80% of those seeds are going to grow. So if you sow 8 cucumber seeds, you're likely to get, if you sow 10 of them, you're likely to get at least 8 of them to germinate and start to grow. It also tells you, and this is information that's hard to find elsewhere, the usual seed life of that particular kind of plant. This is important to know for this reason. Let's say that this packet of seeds has 25 seeds in it. Chances are you don't want to grow 25 cucumber plants unless you're doing it commercially. Maybe you want 4 or 6 cucumber plants, and you think that will be plenty for you. This tells you that if you buy a packet of 25 and you sow, say, 8 this year, you'll have a number left in the packet, and you can just save them and sow them again. So more of them next year and more of them even in the 3rd year, and they should still be good to use in your garden. So you can plan on buying a packet of cucumber seed only once every 3 years. Botanical interest is interesting in that they put the information, some of the information about their growing suggestions inside of their packet. And you have to open it up all the way in order to read all of the information that they provide. They're very proud of all of the information that they do give, but it kind of destroys the packet. So if you do buy botanical seeds and you do open them up, I would suggest you do that pretty carefully and then Scotch tape it back together as best you can if you're going to save seeds from the packet. And this is just the back of that Lake Valley seed packet that we saw before. And they tell you exactly how many seeds are in that packet. So let's look inside the Territorial Seed Company catalog and compare what you find in there with what's available on those packets. So these are the first pages inside of their catalog. You'll notice that there's an index here so you can find the right page for pumpkins or parsnips or whatever you're looking for. There's a lot of cultural information here. And then a key to the symbols. Every seed catalog will have symbols, and you need to look somewhere, usually in the front, sometimes in the back, for what those symbols represent. Here is an enlargement of that page, and let's go over some of these. This little snowflake tells you that that vegetable can be grown even after frost, or during early spring when there is still frost. This tells you that you can grow it in a pot on your deck or your patio. This tells you that it will grow in the summertime and also in the spring and the fall. This little symbol of the clock means it's an heirloom variety, and I'm going to be talking more about what heirloom means. This means that you can buy organically produced seed of that variety. This tells you that you can buy it in a pelleted form. Now, pellets are little balls of clay that are used to separate very tiny seeds like carrots or lettuce. Carrots and lettuce are kind of hard to sow the appropriate distance apart because they are so small. They're hard to take between your thumb and your forefinger. And there are tricks to sowing them if you don't use the pelleted varieties, but the pelleted ones just are easier to grasp, like a somewhat bigger seed. Another way that you can sow them, if they're tiny seeds, is what's called seed tape. This is like a transparent ribbon that has the seeds inserted at the proper spacing, and you just lay them where you want them in a row and cover them with the appropriate amount of soil, and then when the water hits them, that tape just dissolves and it releases the seeds to start germinating. This symbol means that Territorial thinks that they taste particularly good. They have a sort of a breeding program for varieties that they want to make sure are maintained and perhaps get even better in the future. Now, these are the symbols for whether the plant is an annual, a biennial, a perennial, or a tender perennial. Let me explain about those. You're probably familiar with them, but an annual plant is one that starts to grow one year, produces foliage, produces seeds, and then it flowers and then produces seeds, and then it dies at the end of that season. A biennial is one that again starts to grow the first year, and then it overwinters and it does not flower and produce seeds until the following year. Some vegetables, parsley, for example, and Swiss chard are biennials. You can start harvesting them the first year, and if you are able to hold them over the winter, particularly with a little protection, they'll start to grow beautifully in the spring. You can harvest a lot more, but then they will die off at the end of that year. A perennial is any plant that will live for 3 or more years. And that varies a lot with the kind of plant it is. It might be 3 years, it might be 10 years. Trees, of course, can live for hundreds of years. And a tender-perennial is just one that would be a perennial in another climate, except that it will die from frost. So we treat them as annuals here in the Rogue Valley or anywhere where they don't have a nice climate all year round. F1 is the symbol for a hybrid variety, and OP is the symbol for an open pollinated variety, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. This means full sun, this means partial shade, and this means full shade. Most vegetables need full sun, but not all of them. You can grow lettuce, for example, in partial shade. Other greens will usually do it pretty well in partial shade, but if it's going to produce fruit, something that we're going to eat other than the foliage, it will likely need full sun. That means 8 to 10 hours a day. So let's go back to hybrid versus open pollinated. An F1 hybrid variety is produced by crossing two open pollinated varieties. That means taking the pollen from one variety and using it to fertilize the other variety in order to produce a new different variety with different characteristics, with desired characteristics from the parents. One of the advantages is that sometimes they may display what's called hybrid vigor. That means they're going to grow bigger and faster than open pollinated varieties. Nobody knows really what causes hybrid vigor, but it does seem to occur with some kinds of plants. They're also usually more uniform. That means they might all be ready to harvest at the same time or be of the same size. But if you want to save seed from your plants, from your garden, you must get open pollinated plants. The reason is that if you save seed from the hybrid plants and you try and sow them the next year, some of the new plants will be like their parents, but some of them are going to be more like the grandparents, the original open pollinated varieties. So you won't get consistent results. So if you'd like to save seed from your own garden to plant the next year, you have to grow open pollinated plants. There's a lot of confusion between open pollinated and heirloom. Heirlooms are open pollinated plants that gardeners have grown through many generations as kind of tried and true varieties. So gardeners have saved the seed, they've planted in their gardens the next year. They've done that year after year after year. And people think that they are great and they want to continue growing them. There is no standard for what's considered an heirloom. Every company may use a different standard. As a rule, probably 25 to 50 years that variety has been around. But just because it's open pollinated doesn't mean it's an heirloom. There are new varieties of open pollinated plants all the time. And the conclusion thing to remember is that all heirlooms are open pollinated, but not all open pollinated plants are heirlooms. I hope you can remember that. So, moving on to the seed catalog, let's compare what we saw on those packets that you could buy off the rack with what's available in the seed catalog that Territorial produces. So these are the first few pages. Notice that in slicing cucumbers, Territorial has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different varieties, and there might be more on the next page. Just on this page, there are 8 different varieties, whereas for each of the seed companies that had packets on the racks, there was probably just one variety of slicing cucumber, maybe two. Looking more closely at that cultural information, and in the territorial catalog, the cultural information is always in this gray box at the beginning of the listing. Again, it tells you the soil temperature for germination. Very important. You want to make sure that the soil is between 60 and 90 degrees. Tells you again how deep, the spacing that you should use when you sow those seeds. Tells you it requires a lot of fertilizer. Territorial always does give you the name of the species. You don't usually need to know that for vegetables, but I'll show you one instance where it is good to know. And then notice here that the days to maturity are calculated from the date of direct seeding. That is true for the plants that usually we sow directly into the garden. For plants that we transplant most of the time, like tomatoes, you'll see the days to maturity are calculated from the date that we actually transplant. Then there's a whole lot of other information that territorial provides. That's why I say it's great to keep a copy of this right where you do your gardening. In the case of cucumbers, they are subject to some diseases. If you know that, you're likely to have one or more of these diseases in your garden, you might want to make note of that. These are the symbols that they use in their listings. So let's take a look at 3 of the varieties of slicing cucumbers in their catalog. This is a variety called Marketmore. Notice it is an open pollinated variety. It will take 55 days before you can harvest the first fruit. And they say it is disease resistant, one of the most disease resistant that they offer. And there are some other things that they feel are very positive about that. And here is the particular diseases that it is resistant to. And as I said, you have to go back to that other page where it tells you what these codes mean. Now, this one happens to be a hybrid variety. Takes a few more days before you are going to be able to pick that first cucumber, but they say they will be blemish-free and uniform, apex of quality. Now, this is another hybrid. It will mature in 55 days, but notice the symbol here for the pot. This is a good variety if you're going to grow them in a planter on your patio or your deck. They are only 3 to 4 inches long. So it's an excellent candidate for containers. So lots of choice there. Here is the listing for carrots. Again, lots of cultural information. It says that the fertilizer needs are low. In this case, again, those seeds are likely to last for 3 years. Notice that the germination standard, the conventionally grown carrots, the ones that the seed producer has grown in methods that are not necessarily organic, 75% of those are likely to grow, whereas if they're grown organically, you can expect only about 65% of a germination rate. Lots of seeds in a gram. So here is a page, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 different varieties on this one page of the catalog. This is a hybrid variety. It will You'll be able to pull out your first carrots in about 58 days. This is another hybrid variety. Notice that this variety is available in a seed tape as well as in a packet of loose seeds. And this one that is an open pollinated variety, and they recommend it for carrot juice. This one has pelleted seed as well as loose seed. Notice the difference in price. You can get 1,000 seeds pelleted for $12.95. You can get 5 times that many for about the same price or even less. On the other hand, who needs 1,000 or 5,000 carrot seeds? You might want to pay that extra money to have an easier way to sow those seeds. And notice this variety called Merida has a snowflake. And this is a variety that they suggest you sow in the fall, late September, early October, over winter, and then harvest in May through June. So another consideration, notice too, it says dual season, and they like the flavor of it. Squash. The reason I'm showing you the squash is that I mentioned that in both cases, you don't care what the species name is. In the case of squash, you may want to pay attention. This is a cucurbita, that's the genus. And then it says SPP, means several different species. So territorial says sells several species of squash. This is a variety, open pollinated, that is cucurbita. The genus is abbreviated Maxima. Maxima is, you remember the specific epithet. This is another variety called cucurbita moschata. So this is a different species. Even though they're both winter squash, they are different species. They probably cannot successfully pollinate one another to produce seed. This is yet another species called cucurbita pepo. And the reason that you might care for squash is that the pepo varieties, when you harvest them, you can eat them right away, you can store them right away. The Maxima and moschata varieties, when you harvest them, they need to be what's called cured. They need to sit out after you've picked them off the vine, just sit there for a couple of weeks before you bring them in to store them. Notice again that this one is a variety that you can grow in a pot, and here they show it growing in a pot and producing an awful lot of fruit for that one potted plant. Tomatoes. I want to show you a couple of specific things about tomatoes that you should be aware of. And this is an instance where you may not want to grow your own tomato plants. You may want to buy them already started. But if you're trying to decide what varieties of tomato plants you want to buy, this would be a good place to look at some of what might be available and what the characteristics are of those. So looking more closely, notice, as I said before, that the days to maturity are calculated from the date that you transplant, not from the date that you sow the seed. And then the other thing to really be aware of in tomatoes is whether they are determinate or indeterminate. Determinate plants are compact plants, and the fruit ripens over a short period of time. So if you're going to can your tomatoes, you may want to get determinate types that will all ripen at about the same time, then you can all can them all at about the same time. Excuse me. Once they've produced fruit, those determinate tomatoes will probably die. The indeterminate, on the other hand, they grow on long vines. They definitely will need some kind of support. Maybe not trellising, maybe just those wire supports around them or wooden supports of some kind. If you're getting supports for your tomatoes, please do not get the ones that you can buy for $1 or $2 at places like Weimar. Those will not last even a single season. Get really good, sturdy tomato supports that will do the job, and it will do the job for many years. Those indeterminate tomatoes, once they start to produce, they will continue producing a few at a time until they're killed by frost. So if what you want to do is eat a few every day, those are probably the kind that you want. And like cucumbers, tomatoes can have diseases. If you know that you have to beware of certain diseases, you want to be aware of the particular kinds and the code for understanding in the different variety listings which they will be resistant to. So here are some examples. This particular one is a hybrid. You'll pick your first tomatoes in 60 days. It is indeterminate. This is the Beaver Lodge. It is an open pollinated variety, only 55 days until you start to get fruit. Good for a hanging basket or patio container. Notice this pot here. But it is determinate. Once they produce their fruit, they probably will not produce many more later in the season. Fantastic is a hybrid variety. It's indeterminate. Legend is an open pollinated variety. Good tolerance of late blight, but somewhere it says, let me find it. Right here, it's determinate. Notice the days to first harvest: 60 days, 70 to 75 days, 68 days. Now I'm going to show you a listing for heirloom plants. A lot of people really, really want heirloom tomatoes. And that's fine. They usually do taste good. But notice how long it can take before they're ready to harvest. Now, this is a variety that is ready in only 75 days. But this is not going to be ready to pick your very first fruit until 85 days after you transplant. And this one's going to take, I think that says 96 days. So if you are thinking about putting hybrid varieties in your garden, you have to make sure that you've got enough time from the time you transplant, which is probably no earlier than Mother's Day, until you pick that first fruit. You want to make sure that you're very unlikely to have frost before then, nor for several weeks after that, because you're going to be packing only the first fruit after 95 days. And hopefully you want to have more than one or two before the season is over. You might be better just getting them from the growers market. I just wanted to show you some of the other symbols. These are from the herb section of the territorial garden. This is one that the Anise hyssop that needs full sun, and it's a perennial. This Angelica is another one that needs full sun, and it is a biennial. And this one, basil, is only an annual. That will be hit by frost immediately, will die as soon as the first frost comes. Territorial also sells flower seeds, and they have a germination code, a guide to how best to germinate those particular seeds. So their germination code 1 means you should start those seeds indoors, and the temperature needs to be 70 to 85 degrees. That is the soil temperature. This one, instead of needing a warm temperature, actually needs to pre-chill. You may have to put those seeds in your refrigerator for a week or so, or several weeks before you can sow them. And they have more details on their website for those varieties. Some seeds need darkness. You may have to cover the container that those seeds are growing in with a piece of cardboard in order to get them to germinate properly. On the other hand, these particular ones where they say they use germination code 6, those need light to germinate. And instead of covering them all, even with soil, you don't cover them in the least bit. You just kind of press them into the soil just a little bit. So you'll want to pay attention to that when you are sowing your seeds if you're growing vegetables. And just to show you again the symbols, this is a species of viola called Viola cornuta. It grows in full sun or partial shade, and it is a perennial. Zinnias, they have several species of zinnias, and they all like full sun, and they're all annuals. If you are saving seed from one year to the next, whether it's seed that you bought from a grower in a packet or seeds that you saved from your own garden, you need to store them in a dark and cool and a dry environment. You can just leave them in the packets, put those packets in jars or food storage containers or whatever. If you're going to keep them for more than 2 years, you might want to put them in the refrigerator. If you do, add packets of silica gel to keep them dry. Silica gel are those little packets that you find in pill bottles. Just save those and throw them in with your seeds. And if you do store your seeds in the refrigerator, be sure that you take them out of the refrigerator the day before you want to use them, and let that container, that jar, stay at room temperature overnight before you open them, so that no condensation will occur and moisten those seeds before you want them to be wet. If you're saving seed and you want to be sure that the germination rate is still pretty good, you can place 10 or 20 seeds on a damp paper towel, roll it up, put it in a plastic bag, put it on top of your refrigerator. And after the right number of days when you might expect germination, open that up and notice how many have germinated. If you had 10 seeds and 8 of them are germinated, that means they're pretty good. So before we pause for questions, you're probably going to have questions that I'm not going to be able to answer today, but that you do want answered. And I highly recommend that you get this garden guide to the road for the Rogue Valley year round and month by month. That's produced by the Jackson County Master Gardener Association. There is a lot of information in there. It will tell you, excuse me while I move this, it will tell you what to sow or transplant, when. So it will tell you what to sow or transplant in January, not very much, but there are some things. February, March, April, for every single month in the year. What varieties are recommended for the Rogue Valley? This is a place where you can find the length of your growing season for various locations in the Rogue Valley. Another place where you can find out how many days it usually takes from the time that you sow those seeds to when they germinate, and how long those seeds will last. You know, one year for parsnips and maybe peas and corn, and more like 5 years for squash seeds. Excuse me. So if you want to get the garden guide, here are some places where you can do that. There are copies in the public library. You can borrow that, just to borrow them from the public library, just the way you borrow any other book. Reserve it online, request it online, have it sent to the branch where you want to pick it up. You could also order it by mail from the Jackson County Master Gardener Association. Just Google Jackson County Master Gardener Association or JCMGA, and it ought to take you to the website. And then on the upper right corner, you should find the word shop, and then just follow the directions. It's $20 to buy the book plus $5 for postage, and it will usually get to you in about 5 days. Or you can get it from about the same price, usually about $20, from any of the Grange co-ops, any of the places where there is a Grange co-op. They ought to have copies of the book, and also these other places in various communities where there isn't a Grange co-op. So I'm now ready for your questions, and if you have any.
Hi, Ronnie. Thank you for the presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. My question isn't quite about seeds, but kind of. We're fairly new to the area. Our very first year, we planted garlic and watched as one by one they were pulled underground and disappeared. And we discovered gophers. And I'm still, looking at what seeds to order. I'm wondering if there are certain crops that are just not even worth bothering with, or that you need to invest a lot in here in terms of gophers.
Yes, I had the same exact thing happen to my garlic, and also to my eggplant. And they say that garlic will keep away gophers, but obviously it doesn't. They love it. You might want to invest in gopher traps.
Okay.
One tip that sometimes works is to make raised beds and grow your produce in raised beds. But the way you have to do that is to put what's called hardware cloth on the bottom of the raised bed.
Okay.
And that keeps the creatures from coming up from the bottom into the bed.
Okay.
Sometimes they can climb over the side. But gophers can be a problem.
Okay.
Other than eggplant and garlic, I haven't had that much trouble with them.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions? Well, if not, we've spent about an hour talking. I think that's good. We allowed more time if there were a lot of questions, but if there aren't, I guess it is time to say goodbye and good gardening to all of you. Let me say too, if you do have questions, the Jackson County Master Gardener Association is a great place to get more information. There is a plant clinic. If you go to the website and you click on plant clinic, it should tell you the hours. There's shorter hours in the wintertime, longer hours in the spring and summer and early fall. But if something's going wrong in your garden, like what do I do about gophers? That is really an excellent resource. And they will answer your questions by email or by telephone, as well as in person. I know it can be difficult to get to where they're physically located, which is at the Southern Oregon Regional Extension Office campus on Hanley Road between Jacksonville and Central Point. But they can do a lot for you by email or by telephone. So by all means, use that resource and go to the website. You'll find lots of other ways to connect with JCMGA and other information that might be useful to you, including an upcoming spring garden fair, which will be a good place to buy plants, especially native plants. And that will be on May 6th, Saturday, from I think from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. And that will also be on the Sorek campus on Hanley Road.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming. As Ronnie mentioned, the book that was recommended for local growing guides and that kind of thing is available at the library. I just checked, there are 5 checked in at Medford today, so I know I'm going to be checking one out, but I highly recommend others do that as well. And then just a heads up for future programs, in 2 weeks, also on Saturday, same time over Zoom, we're going to have a next presentation from a master gardener named Susan about vegetable fertilizers. So I hope everybody can join us for that one. And then just a last call for any final questions before we sign off.
I see something in chat. What is that?
Looks like Lauren said, thank you for the presentation. I learned a ton. I know I did as well. So thank you, Ronnie.
Good.
All right, doesn't look like there's any other questions. So I think we are all set to end the presentation. Thank you again. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording and we are good to sign off.
Goodbye, everyone.